They've underperformed. I mean, look at the long-run chart from 2000. I mean, it's a bit unfair, right, taking Vodafone in 2000. Remember Vodafone, man, you go from there to where we are now and look at the sector, what it was, a share of the market, off the top of my head, it's like 15%.
Can you remember every CEO's name on that time? I don't know if I can.
Chris Gent.
Chris Gent?
Yeah.
Aaron Sarin?
Yes. Yeah.
Who was after Sarin? Was it Kaleo? Vittorio Kaleo?
Yes, that's right.
It's Vittorio Kaleo. I don't know.
But anyway, the point being, there's not been much value created since.
No, I hear you.
I think one of the broader issues has been this 4-3 magic source. All of the various different telecom players want that number across the European market, and the Commission has been thwarting some of those efforts. I think now as we talk about 5G, and we've heard it from the Ericsson lens, that look, very slow approvals in terms of the rollout of 5G across various different markets, and we know profitability is an issue too for some of these telecom operators. Yeah. It feels as though something needs to change, and maybe it's just this simple 4-3 maths that needs to happen on the number of operators.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, 5G, which we're going to need for, like, you know, if we're going to move to self-driving cars, all this kind of stuff, we're going to need the full 5G build out, and that's expensive. And so for the operators, they need something that allows them to profit, to allow them to pay the capex, to allow them to do these big investment plans. So yeah, I mean, maybe it's going from 4 to 3, maybe that's enough to actually give the profitability to allow the investment.
There's a link here to one of the stories we're doing today, and this is the Ericsson story, where you've seen the warning around the revenue out of North America. The reason why there is a warning, I believe, is because this is an older market that's done more with 5G. So you're seeing Europe meant to be one of the props that comes up here to support the numbers, but that hasn't happened. So I think there's a natural link, Ren.
Yeah.
Let us go back to the original read into Nick, because I think it actually tallies with the conversation we're just having, which is third quarter earnings season is here. Several major US banks amongst those set to report this week. According to LSEG, S&P 500 earnings are expected to rise 1.3% year on year this quarter. And they're off to a good start with 20 reporting so far. Funnily enough, here we go, 85% beating estimates. Shock, horror, especially to a man who spends his life looking at the number of beats. I mean, I normally go for about a 70 to 75% beat. They've gone a bit higher on 80 odd. Let me just tweak the point I wanted to make, though. Gilt yields, yields generally. They're so frothy. Okay, one could argue that they're still discounted to the actual rate of inflation, but they're still frothy compared to where they've been for a whole generation of investors in the last 10, 15, 20 years. That said, so they're so good. Treasuries are such a safe place with big yields if you hold to maturity. But does that mean that the beat from the likes of the S&P and the FTSE and other indices that have a solid yield, 3 to 4%, does that mean it has to be so much better to justify it, whereas previously the yield story was more compelling?
Yeah, look, I think clearly you go back a few years and it was the classic Tina, there is no alternative. You didn't have to have much of a yield, like a 2% dividend yield, obviously beat effectively, you know, close to zero rates across the curve. But in reality, what we've seen is that there's actually quite a nice inverse relationship between multiples, PE multiples, and particularly where real yields are, so real bond yields. So we've done some work to look at the 10-year tips, the 10-year real yield in the US, and look at that against the US PE. And I don't think it's a coincidence that we've come back from 20 times forward earnings to about 18 times forward earnings on the S&P 500. And that's happened at a time when, well, until the last couple of days, we've had this massive run up in yields, 130 basis points in 6 months on a 10-year Treasury real yield. And that's really put a cap on what people will pay in terms of multiples on equities.
You say in this type of